Hey guys, so this is a great question because this was one of the largest learning curves for me, learning 3D modeling specifically for 3D printing. Aside from how to get those flexi joints to work together without fusing, this was the biggest learning curve. And because, like I mentioned in my other video, 3D printing cannot print up from nothing, right? It has to go from the build plate or branching off from the pre existing model that builds up from the build plate. So that means either you have to work on a certain angle that the printer can handle, or you have to add external supports, which personally I find annoying. I hate using supports. So I try to do all of my models, make sure that they will print well without needing those supports. So I'm going to show y'all kind of how I go through that with my 3D models, how I check for that, and kind of things that I do to try and help myself avoid using those supports. So we will talk about bridging in a different video because that's a whole different subject, and some of these things are not going to apply quite the same. So I'll cover that in a different video, but let me show you how I do these. Hopefully it helps. Bye. So these two models are two of my prints that I think have the best example of things that you would expect would really need supports, but I've tuned pretty finely in my modeling to make sure that they print well without supports. This is my Dragon Bookend and Dragon Skull Dice Tower. So all of my models, once I get done modeling them in Nomad Sculpt, I'm going to toss them in my slicer. I'm going to scroll all through all my layers and make sure that I don't have any weird floating bits, and I'm going to look at it and make sure there's not too many places where the overhang is too severe. So first of all, I'm going to slice it, and I'm actually going to turn it upside down. I'm going to look from underneath, because in your slicers, when you have more of an overhang going, you're going to get these little blue bits here. Let's see, there's a little bit here, and see a lot of there. That's trying to bridge over those different places, right? But if I see too much blue where it's too close together, or if I go scroll through and if I had any floating bits where, say, something just pops up in midair right here, that's not good. Everything has to have a connection here to build up from. Even that nose down there, these paws and claws were blended into the stand here so that they have something to build up from. They're not floating in thin air. The Dragon Bookend has some pretty severe overhangs, but because they're not too bad, there's not too much bridging, there's no places that are floating just in midair, it does okay actually. It prints really, really well. And then the Skull Dice Tower is a similar example for that, especially around the teeth here. This is a newer model, so I'm a little more experienced. But even though when you look at this model from the side, you're going to see all these teeth there that you would think, oh, that's going to have an issue, that's going to need supports. But I've actually warped and modeled the teeth a little bit to where I precisely don't need supports here. You see, you don't even really see that much of that blue that we have over here. That means these are going to print perfectly fine, smooth, beautifully, without any issues. And then we have a few of these little overhangs. Like here, this horn, and you see how the tips of the horns don't curve out to where it's floating? It's also blended into the head a little bit there. So I'm very careful about all that. I try to keep around a 45-degree angle, but you can play around with it, look at your slicer, get a little more adventurous with it, like these wings here. A lot of people were skeptical at first when they first started printing this model, but it does perfectly fine without any supports at all. So you just really gotta play around with it. The most important thing is everything you print has to have a connection point to build up and branch off from somewhere, unless you want to add in extra supports. It has to go up straight from the build plate or branching off from your model. So that, again, was one of the most important things that I learned while learning how to 3D model for 3D printing specifically. And it takes a little while to get used to, and a little bit of time and work and practice to get your brain to really see and understand all these angles. But nowadays, most of my models, even my decor models with some pretty extreme angles and things, I can throw in and I'll have very little of these blue spaces, just because I've learned to kind of intuitively know what angles I need to be working with for my models. But yeah, hopefully that was helpful. Hopefully it made sense. Please let me know if you have any other questions, and I will help you out if I can. Y'all have a good one. Bye.